So things are not getting any better for Sony's next big live service game. Last weekend, they had a beta for Concord, but it was paid on PC and then on PlayStation 5. You just needed to have a PlayStation Plus account to get in. But before Sony pivoted pretty much at the last minute, you needed to have pre-ordered the game. You got passes you could hand out to people so they could just jump in technically for free. But it came back to somebody having to pre-order the game, put in money on PC. Well, this weekend, the open beta is going on, and now we have some numbers to look at if the game, say, was just free for people to try out. And, well, Sony, they got some thinking to do here because the game is coming out next month, and based on some of the numbers we're seeing right now with the open beta, they might need a miracle for this thing to launch in, we'll say, acceptable shape for them. So we'll take a look at that, guys. If you enjoyed this video, make sure that like button and subscribe if you're new. Now, funny enough with Concord, I shared some thoughts on it, and I played it last weekend, and I'll talk about my time with it so far this weekend, but I played it last weekend for the beta. And I actually thought the game itself, it's not a bad game. It's just not a very compelling one. And it does feel very generic and them kind of following the path that's already been laid out, which means the game pretty much blends into a lot of these other hero shooters that actually are free and are not, say, $40 like Concord. Well, now we have a look at the open beta on PC, and it's not going well. We had an initial surge, and it did touch almost 2,400 players concurrently, which is not great. I would have thought the open beta for a highly anticipated game, multiplayer hero shooter style game, I would have thrown out a number of like 10,000 people concurrently. Minimum is what I would have expected, especially for something of this caliber coming from PlayStation Studios. Remember, it is Sony releasing a first-party game on PS5 and PC simultaneously, and it just hasn't really moved the needle at all, like anywhere. I do see some people saying that they are enjoying it, say, on PlayStation 5, but it's very clear just based on the numbers we're seeing right now, again, with it just being open for anyone to download and try out, it's not exactly something people are rushing out to do. Now, we have been told by Sony and Firewalk that any progress you make during this open beta is just going to be reset. I think they're going to give out something for participating and, I guess, helping them with, just feedback, balancing, or just trying to stress the servers, which they're having a hard time doing that as well, since they're not really getting enough people probably to stress the servers. But still, for people who participate and are playing the game right now, there's something they're going to get, kind of like a little cosmetic or something just to show they were there from the beginning. Now, this game is coming out August 23rd, so we are a little more than a month away from that release, and it will come out, at this time anyway, at $40. I say at this time because, look, you see numbers like these where users on right now, and it's, say, Friday evening right now, 1,381 users. And that is a level where a game like this that is highly reliant on people just playing the game so that it can function, because if you get down too low, you will start having matchmaking issues, not just with skill-based matchmaking, say, but also just finding people in general. That's the idea, is you have so many people playing all the time, matches are starting and ending constantly, so there's always a pool of people searching to get into the next game. But as you get closer and closer to, say, let's say 1,000 users even, like this, you're going to have long wait times as you're waiting for games to finish up, and you're going to have people who are probably really into the game going up against, say, people who maybe pick it up for the first time and just get absolutely crushed, like squashed, and then they just say, nah, I'm good. They leave and move on to some other game, once again, that is technically free to play. Although I feel like if you buy Concord, you'll probably stick with it for a little while because you've actually put money up. Although, who knows, with Steam, if you don't play more than 2 hours, you can technically get a refund. So there might be some people who go into this, get absolutely crushed by the other team that just is constantly searching and playing the game, and they just move on and say, you know what, now I'm having matchmaking issues just finding teams or people to play with. I'm just going to go ahead and refund it and move on. And I do want to mention, we don't know how many people are playing right now on PS5, on console. We can only look at the Steam numbers, but even if you took these numbers and doubled them, even tripled them, I think there would still be a lot of questions around the longevity of this game. Now, of course, when you see those numbers versus a more established live service game that is under the Sony umbrella like Destiny, where it just randomly has 70,000 players online, yeah, a bit of a far cry from that for Concord. And now people are wondering, what exactly does Sony do here? because I mean, technically they can just launch the game and just hope that it somehow catches on, which I don't really think it's going to catch on with PC players. So in this instance, they would be heavily relying on PlayStation 5 players. But Overwatch exists there. Valorant, right? It's on consoles. That's kind of the issue they're running into, is there are other options right now for people to play. And Concord really hasn't done a lot to set itself apart. Even this most recent open beta, where they did have a new playlist and some other elements to it, I really had to kind of force myself to log in and play. I was just like, I don't know. It's not pulling me in. I don't feel compelled to turn the game on and play it. And some of that had to do with me also not being able to get other people to turn it on and play it. Seriously, it was a struggle. It was almost like pulling teeth to get people to download the 30 gigabytes or so that it is on the PlayStation 5 just to play a few rounds to try out some of the support characters and stuff alongside of some of the DPS and offensive units. It really is like that at this time, which then makes me wonder, okay, how is this going to be when it's $40 a month from now? So it does make me wonder if Sony will pivot and say, add this in the PlayStation Plus, kind of like what they did with Destruction All-Stars, and that wasn't enough to save that game either. While that is still technically running, it's mostly a lot of people just joining up with bots, and that's kind of how it's going. So that's something I wonder about with Concord, if we're going to get to a position where Sony will just kind of keep it running for a while just to see if it can catch on. And if there are matchmaking issues, say with finding people, they fill it in with bots and just hope that that's able to maybe get them to a point where a new season kicks in and all of a sudden people get very, very interested in characters that do feel like knockoffs of things like Guardians of the Galaxy. I will say, though, because Helldivers 2 did so well for Sony and was very, very unexpected, you're also probably going to have a game in the live service sector that Sony launches that doesn't do so well. And I kind of look at Helldivers 2 as probably evening out or even doing more so than Concord, that being there, rather than just completely evening out one for one. I do believe Helldivers 2 did so much better than they were expecting that it's not only made up for Concord, but then some. So we figured not every live service game would catch on for Sony if they were indeed moving to launch like 10 or so of them. They have reeled that back somewhat, canceled some internally, as we saw with The Last of Us Online, for example, and few others that they haven't necessarily named, but we saw what happened with Deviation, where it seemed like people left Deviation, but then also got absorbed internally at Sony, and there's some sort of studio that was formed, the whole thing on that. But it's very clear that Sony has cut back on some of their live service aspirations. The only thing with Concord is they did buy Firewalk seemingly because of Concord, and that would be a point where I would question some of the leadership when it comes to just recognizing gameplay and the hook that's supposed to be there, unless they really thought, you know what, this is our shot at an Overwatch that we can have internally for Sony. And that's it. That we're going to take a chance on this. If it doesn't work, you know what, we'll just call it there and say we took a shot at least, and now we know. And I think going forward, any of these sectors for live service that Sony shows up in, you have to be disruptive, not conforming into place like we're seeing with Concord. So something like Helldivers 2 worked so well because it was technically a new kind of sector that it, like, basically if you play Helldivers 2, that's it. If you want to play a game like that, you're not going to really find one necessarily that's just like that. So you're just going to play Helldivers 2. While that has also fallen off a bit, it's still like 30 some odd thousand concurrent players, which if Concord had that many right now, and this is down, 90% for Helldivers 2, if Concord had that right now, people wouldn't be having the conversation of what's actually going to happen to Concord when it launches and they start asking for money. I've seen some people also mention that they could delay this game. I don't think that's a good idea because it's not going to change much. Let's say they delay it to next year. Are they really going to be able to change the entire core structure of the game in that year? Probably not. Look what happened with just Suicide Squad as an example. They delayed that. It didn't get any better. Like, we still had that live service, weird multiplayer Arkhamverse game that no one really wanted. And I just don't think Concord's all of a sudden going to show up a year from now after just extra development and be a game that everybody really wants, or at least enough people for it to stick around. And that's the biggest thing it all comes back to, is people wonder, what does it matter if there's not that many people playing concurrently? Well, if there's not enough people there to support a live service game, eventually it goes away. So if you really like Concord right now and you're not looking at these numbers like, ooh, that might be a problem, Well, you're going to find out one way or the other eventually when the game just sort of disappears. And then I wonder what happens with Firewalk, because it seems like the talent there is competent at making a game in terms of functionality. It's more or less making it compelling with some of the characters that are just generic and pretty boring, to be honest. Like, their big thing is cutscenes. It's like, everyone I talked about Concord, I don't really want to watch the cutscenes. I just want to get in there and play. So maybe less focus on the cutscenes and trying to build out character lore, and more focus on making very compelling aspects to the gameplay, the gunplay, the powers, the maps, that kind of stuff. And just work to try to have some sort of wrinkle in this hero shooter field. Maybe even do something with PvE. That's also possible. Just something to kickstart this, because it is going to be a rough time in August when they launch this thing at $40 from what I'm seeing right now. But let me know what you guys think about all this down below. With Concord not exactly having a great time with its open beta weekend, really struggling to even attain 2,000 concurrent players consistently. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.